John.
Hey,
Hey, how you
hey,
doing, man?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm good. So this is I don't know how these will roll out, but I have talked to Gina, so this is like my Baroness um, tribute, and you guys have a new record. It's called Stone, and hopefully, I think it'll be out by the time this airs. So congratulations!
Yeah, thank you. We're
Yeah,
really fucking psyched.
that's awesome. That's awesome. And congratulations on like producing it yourself, releasing it yourself, like the whole thing. It's in house, and I just think that's so awesome that we have that ability to do that nowadays, and quite
Yeah, it's
effectively.
yeah, it's been an awesome journey getting to this point because it always was our intention from a long time ago, and it seemed it seemed through the early aughts and into the teens like potentially doing the label and just kind of trying to operate a little bit more independently, a little bit more on a DIY scale was going to be impossible just due to the musical climate of the times. But
Sure.
I think in more recent years it's become a real option for people. Uh, but it is a tremendous amount of work. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
it's not just a little bit more work.
it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's like in 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 theory, it's a great idea, and then when it comes to like marketing and promotion and production and everything, it seems like a whole lot to bite off. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just always had this like gnawing suspicion in the very early years of the band when our eyes were just wide open. We are just trying to learn all the time, trying to absorb what was going around us. But it always seemed to me like if you had your druthers about you, if you had the wherewithal to represent yourself and you knew what you were after. I mean, importantly, like
Right.
that you know what you're after. There's no better person equipped in many situations to whether it's record or produce or promo or market or whatever. For those of us that have the energy and the drive to do it,
Right.
we speak in a unique. Each of us is going to speak in a unique language about our own art, about our own creativity,
Right.
our own music, and we're going to do it in a way that's going to potentially have the potential to reach our audience and the people who want to hear what's going on in a more personal way. And that's music's a personal thing. It always has been. And uh, lest we forget, when all of us started off in DIY or punk or hardcore metal, whatever it was, I think there was this real emphasis on the community,
Right.
like the music community. I think at the time though it was out of necessity. Like none of us had any other options, so we needed the music community uh, to help us book tours and you know record our records and
Sure.
release our records and all this thing. But then if you're the sort of band who did that for decades, you've got those skills now. You've got to, you as a musician have a really particular skill set of non-musical skills that you can draw upon. That's largely the experience of putting things out, the experience of promoting things, the experience of, the lived experience of understanding the difference between having good distribution with your record on an independent level and bad distribution. Bad distribution, you're not coming home with any money and your band can't survive because you have responsibilities at home when you have good distribution. So everything sort of,
Right.
throughout our history, so it's always just been, decisions made of necessity, but decisions, in terms of independence made out of um, a need for integrity and a need to be connected to, if we're going to be those people on stage talking into microphones about the DIY community or the music community or talking to our fans about how they brought us there. Well, we might as well live that life, and we might as well walk that walk if we're gonna,
Right.
broadcast it to tens of thousands of people at Greenfield Festival and Switzerland. Anyway, like
Right.
it's quite a journey, and it is for all the work that it is, and I kind of hem and haw about it when we're trying to put a record out because all I do
Right.
is I'm either a label or a singer or a producer, or whatever, depending on the day.
Right.
But the work is worth it because at the end of the day, we can rest easily on our successes with a sense of pride that comes with that hubris. And when we make a mistake, we don't have to point fingers and blame other people. We just go, okay, well, we have to learn from this, you know?
Right.
So everything, both the pluses and the minuses, all end up being positives in the long run, because, you know, this is a, like when
Yeah.
you're a young musician, you're constantly learning. You're trying to constantly improve things and represent yourself as accurately as possible. So
Right.
anyway,
Well,
soapbox.
I love that because I've often said that, you know, from doing this, we're all trained to do like 20 other jobs. If the band ended tomorrow, anyone that's done this in an independent band could go work at a label or a management or an agency or something like. We're all trained to do these sorts of things. So why not do them for ourselves? And inevitably, how many times have you been sitting in those meetings with, you know, the other side of the desk, and they're telling you about your marketing numbers and your record sales and you're all this, and you're like, well, how many fucking shows have you played? How many vans have you gotten into? How many, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and
and
the simple fact is those data points are important.
sure,
They're not like I don't ignore them, but they always any one of those meetings, whether it's tour, record, or just career related, every one of those meetings leaves out the most important and the least easily articulatable or definable thing, which is that unknown fan response. You know, I've noticed that you know, in this sort of contemporary era where people are able to sort of specify. You know, you got Taylor doing Taylor's thing, Taylor's way, and
yeah,
uh, you've got all these artists who are out there. You know, sort of, you know, for lack of a better term, like subverting the paradigm in the way that they need to.
right,
Um, you know, I think that we have to, you know, we have to take into account that each artist has a uniqueness to them that needs to be culture or fostered, that
right,
needs to flourish, because just because, you know, one type of marketing works for one, you know, heavy metal band doesn't mean at all. And in fact, 9 times out of 10 means it probably won't work for us, because,
right,
you know, if Ghost is out there touring, and you know, like I remember all these like weird little marketing campaigns that they've done that worked like gangbusters for them, but like we ain't Ghost. Like that, like
right,
vibrators and dildos aren't going to work for Bear. It's just like that's just a fact. I'm just using that because there's a
sure,
clearly that wouldn't work.
sure,
But then you know, when you've got, you know, somebody across the table from you telling you like, okay, well, last time you were in Chicago, you know, you sold this many tickets at this venue, and so moving forward, this is what you're worth, and da 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 da. And it ignores the human component, which is, yeah, if we sold 2,000 tickets at the Vic in 2015, uh, that doesn't mean that those 2,000 people are still going to be around to
right,
pay to see us now. There could be zero. There could also be
yeah,
12,000 because of some viral thing, or just, you know, whatever,
yeah,
like some trend or fad that happens. And I think that what happens is, you know, like operating in this universe, I think that like companies do their best to teach us that, well, you got to do a certain thing on TikTok, and you know, I'm like, okay, fuck that, like, because I'm not doing
yeah,
the
yeah,
TikTok. Or, you know, you've got to approach your audience in this way on Instagram, and I'm like, yeah, but you know what, my instinct tells me that that's not going to work, and that if I just speak directly and more
right,
honestly and more openly, that that might be better marketing for a band like us
right.
than to like puff our chest out and, you know, airbrush, you know, airbrush a full head of hair on me or
Right.
whatever. You know,
Me too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, let me ask you this. So is it something that, or have you explored the concept of releasing other bands? Is it something that, or is it just your band? Because I know you have your own label imprint right now that's doing you guys, you yourself. Would that be something
yeah.
you'd be interested
So I started a label in like 2014 or 15 or something. So I've released 3 records. I've released Purple, Golden, Gray, and now upcoming Stone. Um, there's always the idea that I could grow the label to include our side projects or bands external to the Baroness world entirely. But I need I need to prove that I have the time to do that before it
Right.
happens. I have somehow managed to keep myself fairly busy with with the few things that I do. Um, I think it would be great, but it's not at the moment. It's not very real. It wouldn't be
Gotcha.
very realistic because I wouldn't be able to do anybody a
Gotcha.
good
Well,
service.
releasing yourself is such a labor of love. You know, it's such a you're so emotionally invested and just invested. Period. You know, so it does seem like it would be a wholly different thing. You know, aside from even a band that you really love and guys you really love or whatever it might be, it's not yours. It's not you. You know,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Exactly.
Well, let's back up. So, how did you get started? This is a very vague question, but how did you actually get started playing guitar?
I was born in 1978, so
Yeah,
MTV was probably the reason. I'm
yeah,
sure it was.
yeah.
Like when I would have been like 10 years old in the late 80s. Uh, you know, Adolescent in the early 90s, which I think is there was a period of time where you didn't really talk about how you're like a big 90s music fan, but I always was like, yeah, I mean, for
Yeah.
me, like I think through some of the early years of MTV, I became fascinated with the idea of playing guitar, but it was Nirvana and Smells Like Teen Spirit that really, when that video debuted, that the reality of being a musician became attainable to me,
Sure.
and I remember it as clear as day. Like I remember seeing the video for Teen Spirit, and I never heard of the band because I grew up pretty deep in the country. We didn't have a music scene. There wasn't a venue that had shows or national tours that would come through ever. So culturally there wasn't anything happening around me. So it was all absorbed through the media. And I saw the Teen Spirit video, and I I really, I mean, might be retroactively like inflating this a little bit, but I remember having the impression that all of a sudden I was hearing music for the first time that told me told me through its music that I could write music like that.
Right.
That you did that like you didn't have to be a master craftsman to build a song
Right.
in the same way that you would have to know some fairly uh, sophisticated principles of woodworking in order to build like a world class cabinet. But I was
Right.
like, Teen Spirit, okay, that is like clearly just a couple of chords.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, I mean, I think it was the first time that I listened to music and I was like, oh, music's not about the notes. It's not about the words. It's about the energy. It's not about
Right.
what's being played. It's about how it's being played. And, so I think it's easy for me to say now, I was hook, line, and sinker. All right,
Right.
distorted guitars, sweaty, music for people who don't fit in. That's me. And
Totally.
I was like sort of off to the races. I never, for the next 10 years, I would never have even considered for a heartbeat that I would become professional at it.
Right.
I didn't. I was very serious about. I was very serious about like being a creative person for throughout my life. I was very serious about, and I thought it would just be art. I just thought,
Sure.
I'll be a painter, or whatever, and that'll be it. But through the around the turn of the millennium, around 2000, or just thereafter, I started playing music. I started writing more songs, with the lineup of people that would become the earlier versions of Baroness. And um, I remember always, just like throughout my whole early learning phase, I just remember constantly thinking like, I'm not very good at this. I'm not very good at guitar,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
I don't have a very good voice. But does that matter if I like care about it as much as I do? And all the answer always was like, no, it doesn't. Not being a
No.
good guitar player, not having a good voice doesn't mean I can't be a musician. Like I have
Right.
reams and reams of evidence on 7-inch and 12-inch records that
Right.
proved to me you don't have to be a good singer and you don't have to be a good musician in order to write not just good but great music. I think there's
Right.
countless examples of it. And then I, over the years, I realized that what I was saying was a little off base. You don't have to be a technical musician. You don't have to be a technical singer to be a great musician.
Right.
What you have to do is you have to you have to need to create. You have to
Right.
need. You see a space, like you see a space in the world that is empty. You see a vacuum, and your first impression, your first instinct is, I need to fill that with something. I need to create something to fill that void. And I think for
Yeah.
me, it's sometimes it's just that simple. Like I like, like nature, I abhor a vacuum. I don't know what to do with empty space, empty time. It's either going to defeat me and make me miserable, or I'm going to create something and find myself there. And that's always been the impetus. It's
Yeah.
just like a purely creative spark, and then you as the artist have to go, okay, well, is this music? Is it lyrics? Is it
Right.
artwork? What am I going to do?
Well, I love that because you're so right about the Nirvana. For our generation, Nirvana were what the Ramones were. They sort of killed the notion that you had to be a technical wizard to be a musician, because at in the 70s it was Yes and Genesis and Led Zeppelin, all these bands that were made of basically studio musicians, the guys that were so proficient, and the Ramones just said, you don't have to do that, you can do this. And then let's face it, it got pompous again, and it got glam rock and shredder. Every guitar, every band had Warren De Martini or Eddie Van Halen or George, all the shredder guitar players that were technically amazing masters. And then Nirvana, once again, they were the Ramones for our generation. They did it again. They were like, nope, you need a bar chord and you need some passion. And
Right. But I think what the 70s had a great deal of was world class technicians and craftsmen who also were great, were musical, who also were
absolutely.
songwriters, who also, then I think in the 80s there was the industry had sort of moved beyond the, like, it didn't need you to be both at the same time.
Right.
You didn't
Right.
need to be, you don't need to be Daryl Hall anymore. You just need to
Yeah.
be
Good
the
reference.
guy that, yeah, you need to be the guy that shows up and shreds on like a Skid Row track or something,
Right. Right. It
Um,
became only about that. It became
yeah, and
only about that.
it became about like your singer had to be good looking
Yeah.
and have good looking first, passable or great voice was sort of secondary, but it was like I like the fact that it relied heavily on attitude,
Yeah.
but I didn't like the fact that the attitude. I didn't like the particulars of the attitude in a lot of that late '80s music. So glam rock to me at the time was just like the ultimate evil, and that's why Nirvana, that's why Flaming Lips, that's why Sonic Youth, that's why Dinosaur Jr. Because in Dinosaur Jr. you get stadium rock level guitar shredding without Steve Vai level cheesy sass.
Right. Right.
Not that and I do have I have grown up. I have learned to find value in the music that I thought was so superficial
Right.
in the 90s. But I still prefer the innovators. I still prefer the left of center creative mavens who are more likely to make noise than to fluidly run through arpeggios.
Right.
And I think in the '80s, well, you had Eddie. I mean, you had '90s, you had Dimebag. Like you had some guys that were like really, really like alien level talented
Right.
technically, but also quite musical, also quite dynamic in the way that they were writing songs and interesting
Right.
and sort of creating things. But you didn't have very much invention. So
Right.
for me, like we didn't. There was no better decade for us to come up in other than the '90s because it was for something. At you had your Fugazis, you also had your Pearl Jams, you also had Nirvana. You had bands that were like for something. They stood for something that, you know, that we as kids could understand, whether it was
Yeah.
being, you know, or Hetfield like stood for the misunderstood kids, understanding the misunderstood,
Yeah.
you know, social issues, you know, all sorts of things. But you also, but those bands are also against something, and that's been an important aspect of music for me. Is if you're for this one thing and you've got a social agenda, then you know, and this is why punk and hardcore and metal have this, you know, and hip hop, a lot of like a lot of musical styles that have a fringe have musicians that stand against the evils of music or
Yeah.
social issues, whatever. What I'm saying is, you have a message for something. It's also against something else. There's a whole set of like ethics and values that comes with it, and some of that stuff is, you know, a bit of a house of cards. It kind of
Sure.
flounders and flops after a while. But like, you're energizing young future musicians like me. You're energizing young listeners and giving them some meat on the bone that wasn't totally just you know, like the Motley Crue girls, girls, girls
Well,
kind of vibe.
something you said there, it's funny. Eddie Van Halen was such a shredder for the times, but also you're right. He was so musical and so innovative and such a great writer that the people he spawned, I feel like they sort of missed the mark. They were so,
I feel like everybody missed that mark. Yeah,
yeah,
everybody missed it.
interested in emulating him and his hammer-ons and all the things he innovated, but they didn't get the whole story, you know?
Right.
He was the Les Paul of our times. He was a true creator and innovated so much that we needed that guy at that moment to sort of spearhead the rest of, you know, the next 20 or 30 years, just like, you know, Les Paul before him. Um,
Right.
you know, and one thing I brought up to Gina, that shifting gears a little bit, that I think is so interesting about you guys is that you you don't I do not. I am a Baroness fan. I do not think of Baroness as merely a metal band. You are not a metal, just a metal band. You have metal influence. You have metal uh,
Credentials.
ingredients. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and
No, good
ingredients. And
ingredients. Yeah.
you could play a show with metal bands, but you could also play a show. We could play a show, successful
For
show
sure.
together, or a successful tour. Um, and I think it's interesting your gear choices. I think it's when we played that festival together.
Oh, yeah, we didn't
I
talk about
watched
gear.
I watched the whole set and I thought it was so amazing. You guys were using Fender combo amps, and for the most part, single coil pickups, P90 pickups, Fender guitars, Telecaster Strats, Jazz Masters. Is that
Hmm.
a? I asked Gina, but I want to ask you: is that a conscious choice on your part to get away from the sort of trappings of heavy, quote unquote, heavy guitar?
I think initially that was part of the impetus, but that was a little more on the superficial side of things. Like, uh, you know, at the time, well, as everybody had, you know, like I think you guys were like LP specials, right? Like
We
customs,
we're
deluxes, all that kind of stuff.
yeah, we're like Les. I'm
Les
Les
Paul,
Paul Les Paul custom guy.
okay,
Yeah.
that's right. You got like a black Les Paul custom, right?
I do.
Am I right?
Well, I had a black. I did it like Michael Schenker. I had half black, half white, and then the headstock started breaking on. I've got a fucking bunch of Les Pauls. I mean, I got one right here, blah blah blah. But um, I mean, and they're a little. Here's my thing with Les Pauls. I love them. They're perfect for what I do, but I also get bored with. I want to. I want to use other shit too. Yeah.
Right. Well, so for me, it was I had a Les Paul custom. I had like the Frampton one. It was like, you know, it was like
Oh
an
yeah,
'86 Olympic white with 3 gold pickups and all
it's
gold
great.
car. It was just, yeah, it's nuts. I still have it. It needs a tune up big time, but I it did work. You know, like, I'm
Sure,
not saying it
that's the
sounded bad.
thing.
It
Yeah,
didn't sound bad. I didn't move away from it because it sounded bad. I moved away from it because it didn't feel right. And I noticed that when I would play a Stratocaster, when I play a Telecaster, where many people moving from Gibson to the Fender style guitars, the first thing you notice is, oh, it's kind of tough, or it's a little more naked and exposed. I didn't see those things. I didn't see it as being more difficult or more challenging. I saw it. I saw. I have come to see Les Pauls as having like a slightly, like they're a sledgehammer.
right.
You can destroy. a building with the
Yeah.
Les Paul. You can
Yeah.
absolutely level it to the ground. But Fenders are scalpels. They
Yeah.
do precision cuts, and for my money, the Fender voicing, the Fender setup, the single coil pickups allow for a more accessible type of expression.
Yeah.
So the real character of my playing, and of many musicians playing, the real character is only exposed when you kind of remove uh, some of the bulk around it. You know, I think the thing about Gibson that's so amazing is it's just beefy. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
do anything to achieve that tone.
Yeah.
But similarly, you can't convincingly thin it out or adjust its tone very easily. Like Les Paul's a Les Paul's a Les Paul. There's not a great deal of difference between
Right.
a neck and the bridge pickup. You know, you can do whatever you want to those EQ knobs, but the sound is still really. It's more like when you adjust the tone and volume on a Les Paul, you're only removing stuff. You know, so when you
Right.
roll the tone knob back, you're rolling away the highs.
Yeah.
Uh, on a Fender, and on Strat, I'll just use a Strat with like a 5-way selector because I love those guitars so much. There are adjusting the EQ on that. It's not as much as and it's not as much a case in terms of feel as starting from 100% and then pulling back to 75, pulling back to 50. It just feels like you're adjusting the overall sound of it, you know, because
Right.
the output's not so high. There's not so much extended low end, you know, and the thing I really like about Fenders is that when you strum a chord, there's enough sonic space in between each of the 6 notes in an open chord that you can hear each note.
Right.
Whereas my experience with Les Pauls was generally like a G, you know, an open G chord just sounds like a G chord. It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't. I don't hear all the elements working at once, and those are not. That's not like pros and cons. Those are just the. Those are my impressions, and I prefer at the expense of fullness sometimes, at the expense of that robust Les Paul sound, I prefer to hear the musician behind it a little bit more. And that's why I think that like a Strat really suited a player like Hendrix or
Right.
like Stevie Ray Vaughan or David Gilmour or Johnny Greenwood. Like there's something very personable and exposed about that sound. Not to say you can't have a fully exposed sound. I mean, like, I can't imagine Slash and
Right.
his character through anything other than Les Paul. But for me, I wanted to be able to make those precision cuts. I like the 2 and the 4 position on a Strat a whole lot. I like those wacky, shiny, low output, out of phase, out of
Yeah.
uh, like sort of sounds. I in a live setting, I play them as much as I play any other position on the neck,
No shit.
or in pickup position. Yeah, yeah. I play quite because I think with the Fender, like let's just stick with Fender, stick with gear for a second. So if you've got 5 selectors, each of those 5 has a very clearly distinct sound. I think 2 and 4 sound kind of similar. The middle sounds a little, it's good, but it doesn't have a ton of character. Bridge and neck
Right.
sound like they sound wildly different to me. So I can say, we have a song. I can make some decisions really whenever I want to, and playing live in a song to like if I want people to hear Gina a little bit more, I have a setting. I just have a switch that I
Yeah.
pickup selector that doesn't make me less audible. It like makes me less present, so she can come to she can come to the
Right.
foreground, and vice versa. Furthermore, there's just like a different quality of the character of attack. You have to play it a little bit further ahead where you would, but it's the expression and it's the way that they take effects pedals, which are kind of big to us, and then the way that they pair with combo amps that I think is superior with Fenders. Like I
I
think on
think you're
that tour
right.
I was Fender combo, and recently I've always had at least one Roland JC 120 on stage with me.
Oh yeah.
Um, So it's like, if you were to look at our backline, you're going to think like classic blues, country or
Right,
whatever. And
right.
if and even if you get down to like the floor level, like what effects are we using, or what type of pickups are we using? We use really classic, really like vintage voiced pickups, equipment, effects.
Yeah,
Like nothing too crazy.
yeah.
Um,
I love that about your band, though. And I think it's part of the DNA of your band, and it's part of what makes your band stand out. If you go to, let's say, a heavy music show and it's a bunch of bands, you're gonna if you're a total novice, you're gonna remember Baroness because you guys intrinsically just sound different, and it's because of those elements. I mean, your
yeah,
writing as well, and your songs are, I think, a cut above the rest as well. But just having it in your DNA, in your sort of larval level,
yeah.
like that, like single coil pickups and combo amps, things like that. Would you call yourself like more of a strat guy these days, or do you have a sort of variety going on?
Uh, I I'm a strat guy on certain songs.
Gotcha.
Um, I had like Rickenbacker built me this custom instrument while we were recording our last record, and I was using that on that tour. I've been using that since 20 early 2020. Um, it has a very I mean, as Rickenbackers do it, this
Yeah.
one has a very, very, very particular sound that is neither Fender nor Gibson. Which is why I like that. And there's certain things I think sound better with jazz masters. I I like I don't I feel like if I was going to be a one instrument person, if I was going to have that one that like everybody
Yeah.
identifies, I feel like I would have found it by now. What I've
Yeah.
come, what I'm more comfortable with, and what I sort of appreciate more, uh, in that it's fun to experiment with different instruments, is that I have a small now it's a small collection of instruments that I'll tour with.
Yeah.
I lose count of the guitar sometimes. Maybe
I
you're the
mean,
same as
yeah.
me. I have much more than I need, and much more than I know what to do with. But I don't want any of them to sound the same, because I see each one as a separate tool with a separate purpose and a separate function, and where I can use a drill. I'm using a carpentry reference, but where I could use a traditional corded drill and a battery powered driver to do many of the same functions. There are also uniquely individual things that each of those tools is going to is going to give to me. Same with guitars. There is I can play an entire Baroness set on the Strat. I can play
Right.
an entire Baroness set on a Telecaster. It'd be difficult for me to do the entire set on the Rick. It would be difficult for me to do the entire set on a Jazz Master. But well, now I have one Jazz Master I can do the whole set on. It's more that I become, and then I've got my the prize of my collection, which I can't tour with because it's too old. So I've got a '62 ES330.
Oh wow.
It's got the like black P90s in it,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's ever really had any major work or rehabs ever done on it. It never goes out of tune. It sounds incredible.
Wow.
Sounds like the piece of wood that it is. So for me, it's just that each instrument has its own sort of tonal blueprint or fingerprint, and my job as the artist is to realize that all of these paintbrushes and colors and tools that I have can be used in conjunction to create a more three-dimensional picture with greater depth,
Right.
rather than to refine the one instrument and really unlock its true potential. I'm like, well, just keep everything chaotic and kind of changing, and it will force me into different types of unique
Yeah.
potentials. And again, I think you hit on this with the last statement that you had, but the important thing is that you know this isn't a one size fits all mentality for every band. The fact that I choose more expressive, what would feel like more expressive exposed instruments to me, with less of a plug and play overwhelming awesome heaviness. The fact that we really like to rely on sophisticated tones that sometimes make create their own challenges. But that's just what the band is. Even when we're not talking about gear, we're choosing.
Yeah.
We try to make choices that don't necessarily fit because we're trying to find what we are by breaking conventions rather than adhering to them. And I
Yeah.
think so. I think the instrument's an extension of that mentality and that concept. And some, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There,
Sure.
like I know if you go, there's like subreddits that are devoted to, how much better we'd be at this point if we had just stuck with Marshalls and Les Pauls all the time.
Right.
I say, yeah, but that's not up to you, man. Like like
Right.
the journey of the musician, the journey of the artist is not one where you follow your audience. It's one where you are walking hand in hand with them. You don't
Sure.
service them, they don't service you. The best relationship that this band can have with our particular audience is one where we take bold risks and we make weird choices, and we're excited enough and impassioned enough about making those decisions that we do them with enthusiasm. And it's
Right.
again, it's all down to energy and enthusiasm. I can play my songs totally accurately, but if I don't put life into them, if I don't mean what I'm saying when I say it, then the audience knows that. Like
Absolutely.
people think audiences are or masses of people are kind of idiots sometimes. Well, that's just because like if I do this and if I do the a little bit louder now, a little bit louder now,
Right.
the
Right.
guitar and something, you can make people get quiet. You can make them clap. Like that's just some weird stage dynamic power. But the real power comes, the real like magic of music happens when everybody realizes that they're part of the show. And
Right.
when I stop realizing that, yeah, like playing that solo like super fluid, like that's not going to make the show better. What's going to make the show better
Right.
is if I pour myself into it. And in order to pour yourself into your project as an artist, you have to take the first step. you have to
Right.
you have to say, like, on some level, it's my energy and my enthusiasm for this weird choice that I've made that is the only thing that's going to translate through the speakers to the audience.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that our audience, at least at this point, understands that if nothing else, we're trying to do something different every time we try to do something. So
Well,
it shouldn't be surprising, and it shouldn't. There should not be Orthodox Baroness fans who say, "Oh, it's one way and one way only.
right.
It's this one sort of thing that they do." Now that's never been our thing. Like we've
Right.
always tried to prove with each release, even with each song across an album, that like, hey, it's gonna change, man. Like
Right.
music's about the human experience. The human experience isn't one fucking thing. The
Right.
best way that Baroness has to express that human experience is through the variety of the
Yeah,
experience.
and I think that's intrinsic to your band, like I said. But you hit something there. It's like you're right. I think we have to give our audiences and the fans a lot more credit because you're right. They know when we're phoning it in, if we're phoning it in, if there's
Totally.
something else going on. Because we, as fans of music, have known when I can tell when a band's up there just going through the motions. I can tell when they're putting out records that they feel obligated to do to just to basically go out and get touring again and selling merch so they can make money and all that shit. It's really obvious. It's very
Yeah,
obvious.
and we've all slipped up once or. I mean, it's impossible to have a 1,000% batting average. Like
Sure.
we've all we've all written a song that, in spite of its popularity, we wish we hadn't written.
Right.
Like,
God, I gotta fucking play this again. Yeah, yeah.
no, yeah, exactly. So, and maybe more importantly than that, is that you and I and everybody, the majority of people that we know, we play a type of music that its its first priority is when it is that it's genuine, that it's real.
Right.
The authenticity of underground music is critical. And how we define authentic is going to change from band to band, genre to genre. But like pop music doesn't need to play by those rules. Pop music just needs to play by, like, is it catchy? Does it make you dance? Does it make you feel good? Cool, okay. But
Right.
the type of music we play is like, does this group of people mean it? Like that's always
Right.
the thing. Like, watch footage of the Clash. Like, I'm sorry, but they mean it. Like
Right. No, you're right.
it's a genuine thing when you see the. And I think it's funny because Gina and I we go to a lot of shows, and this we were watching this band, and we're like tripping on how good this band was. And I was trying to figure out what it was in real time that was like pulling such a reaction out of me, because the music wasn't like. I mean, I've heard wild music played
Right.
at the highest levels. This was like a club. This was like a club with like 20 people in it. Like these weren't
Right.
like the most cutting edge bands of all time. But the band itself was putting so much energy into the performance and so much enthusiasm that it was more impressive than I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't want to call it out, but it was more impressive than like any professional level band that's just like hitting all the right notes, but maybe
Right.
not sassing them out enough, or like I don't want to like throw Dream Theater under the bus, but sometimes I
Right.
sometimes I watch the play. I'm just like, guys, you're working so hard at
Yeah.
the technique that the performance, the energy of the performance feels a little bit like theater,
It's not
know?
there. Yeah. There's so
Yeah,
much
and
going into
that's
yeah.
as soon as when you're in a live music setting and the theater of the whole thing becomes apparent to you, you're done. It's done. You might as well walk out of the show.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. Okay, so I always ask everybody, and I won't keep you much longer, but what is a piece of gear that got away? Something you maybe got stolen or lost or hawked or something that stuck with you?
Oh, here's a good one. Yeah, yeah, because that's really early, before I was even like a known musician at all. Like in 98 or 99, I was living in Providence, Rhode Island, and I had like a punk hardcore band at the time, and we rehearsed in like a buddy of mine's basement. And one day we showed up at the basement, all of our gear was gone.
Oh, it's the worst.
And this was in like a pretty, I wouldn't say it was like a rough neighborhood, but it wasn't like, it was a sort of neighborhood where you certainly would lock your car front
Sure.
door windows at night. And so we were pretty steamed about it, and I was like, well, you can hear us when we're playing, so we're definitely drawing some crosshairs on this property that my friend was renting. And so whatever, I was like, I had, it was the first like nice guitar I ever owned. It was a Gibson SG that I think I got in '96,
Okay.
and I've been playing it for a few years, but as far as I was concerned, it was like the best guitar ever of
Totally.
all time. And the only notable thing about it was I had like a little Mega Man sticker right next to the pickup selector. So that was really the only thing of note about it. Anyway, it was gone. I sort of fudged some homeowners, and I was young, I was in college, so I was still covered under my parents' homeowners insurance.
Uh huh.
And so we sort of like adjusted what the value of the guitar was. I went to the Guitar Center in Boston, and I got the white Les Paul that I was telling you about earlier,
Oh wow.
with all the gold hardware and the three pickups. I mean, yeah, I traded in a stock '96 Gibson SG for an
Yeah.
'86 custom LP. Like, yeah, I won. So I was really satisfied with that.
Right.
Until I realized that it was like a guitar that I had a connection to. I was,
Yeah.
and yeah, because I was playing the Les Paul, and I was like, oh man, this thing is super cool. It's heavy, it's weighty, it sounds great, it's gold. It
Yeah.
sparkles across the room. But like that little plank that I used to play, because I remember the SG feeling like just like a little. It felt like a
Yeah.
2x6 or something. It was light, and it was neck heavy, so it always kind of spun the wrong way.
So weird.
But I
Yeah.
but I loved it, and it kind of had that squishy Iommi sound that like
Oh yeah.
sometimes SGs do, that little lag in the or sag in the attack of the notes, and so yeah, I genuinely missed it. And
Yeah.
then 2 years later, I was at the Met Cafe again, or Lupo's Heartbreak Hotel again in Providence, Rhode Island,
Oh,
and
Lupos.
I
Yeah.
was yeah, yeah. So I was at Agnostic Front H2O show, and I was kind of a knucklehead at that point, but H2O finished. There was I got in some kind of little dramatic physical scuffle thing, and I remember I was like, my friends were sort of like dragging me away from this fight sort of thing that I was in, Agnostic Front had just come on, and I remember being like drugged, by the elbows by two of my friends, and I'm looking up at the stage, and Vinny's. Okay, this is where this whole story becomes hearsay and my perception, and I was not like a very clear-headed individual during this period of my life at all in any way, shape, or form. But I still believe this is genuine, and all my friends back me up. But they're on stage, Vinny Stigma, playing a Oxblood Red SG with a fucking Mega Man sticker next to the pickup floor.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a Mega Man. It was like a Mega Man sticker that like I cut the head out of it, so it wasn't even
Right.
like.
It was
I mean,
something about it. Yeah.
I'm looking up on stage, and like one of my buddies like, "Hey, man, like, is that your guitar?" And I was like, "Shit, yeah." So like the show's over, and I saw the guys. That kind of hanging out behind or in front of the club. I was stopped from this because by the end of the night I was completely shit faced. I was going to go like at least verbally assault Vinny Stigman, ask him where he got,
that
like,
would have been bad.
Did you steal my? No, I mean, like, I knew it was going to be bad. That wasn't going to end well. My friends were just like, dude, you're such an idiot. You got so much better guitar because of this. Like,
Yeah.
don't
That's
worry
interesting.
about it. But yeah.
Do you think maybe he had gone into like a pawn shop or something in Providence, maybe bought it that day?
I'm sure some of my knucklehead friends who knew that my band was down there, I'm sure they did it. I'm sure that I'm 100% positive that Vinny Stigma had nothing to do with it.
No, I'm just saying, but now I'm interested in like, where did he get it from though? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, we were all feeding our habits at that stage in our lives, and I'm sure that my friends fed their habit by selling my guitar to a pawn shop and somehow
wow. But that's so, but it's like it could have gone to anybody, but it goes to this other guy from a band you went and saw. Like,
I was psyched.
That's such a good story. That's such a great story.
Like I was like the next morning I was like, should I have like approached him about the guitar? And I was like, no.
It's great.
Yeah,
it's great. As a matter of fact, I ask every guest that question, and that's one of the better resolves I've ever heard. So
yeah.
I think
because it got away, and I was upset about it, but it got me somewhere else too. I was like,
and you saw it. You know where it went.
I know.
It got away, but you know where it went. Well, anyway, John, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I really appreciate it, man. You were, your band and you guys were some of the first people when this thing was pitched to me that I wanted to talk to. Guitar players that I've always found endlessly interesting, and a band that I've loved absolutely. So, thanks again for doing it, man.
Of course, man. Thank you.
Take care, John.